I guess what we were talking about when we ended was...
Import substitution.
Yeah.
I gave the example of the wine industry, okay? Another example is that British Columbia is a great sports area. And there's been a number of manufacturers, small ones, that have recognized that the development of sports equipment and dress are things that can sell in British Columbia. There's one manufacturer in Vernon who uses one of these new materials that breathes, which is very, very important for anybody who hikes or is involved in winter sports. By using that material and creating well-designed products, they've been able to establish a good market for their products in British Columbia, and they're shipping them all over Canada. Over at the University of Victoria, as you know, someone developed, they developed the gear for hypothermia. And so you can now get these floater jackets that will allow people to survive in severe weather conditions or water conditions. That was perceived off in the first instance for sports fishermen and things of this nature in our coastal waters. Those things are being manufactured and sold for the people that are working in the Arctic, in the North Sea, and all sorts of things. So I could go down a whole list of things where people have seen the opportunity to pursue something, perhaps for British Columbians first and foremost. But if it's a quality product or a quality service, it can be sold very, very much in other places as well.
There are many people that would say that the new high-tech industries can be equated with the demise of jobs instead of increase. How do you respond to that?
Well, I'll tell you, I've had look at the question of jobs in offices, in research institutes, and others. And in Vancouver, between 1971 and 1981, the number of jobs that were involved in those kinds of intelligence activities went up over 100%. The number of jobs in management increased by 151%. The number of jobs involved in clerical occupations, which is where all the word processors and so on are supposed to be putting people out of work, increased 161%. So what I see going on is, rather than the replacement of people by the technology that's coming, is that the technology is permitting so much more to be done that in fact you are employing more people because you are having more output. Now, it is conceivable that it might be like the old telephone exchanges where people were going dial, 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 and Lily Tomlin-like sticking things into old boards. I have read in a recent Scientific American, if we had continued with the 1940s technologies in telephone, that everyone in the United States would have to be a telephone operator today to be able to deal with the number of calls that are taking place. So, sure, there are more people engaged in the telecommunications industry than there were in 1947. Many more. Not the whole population, but that would have been absurd. So I, for one, am not part of the Luddites. I do not believe that technology is going to create our downfall. I do recognize that there's going to be relocations. There's going to be need for retraining. And all those things are uncomfortable. It was an expectation of people in the 1940s and even in the 1950s that they would train for a job and they would spend their whole life in that. That's no longer happening. Even myself, I've been through now maybe 5 different activities, and I have to retrain and learn as I go through those, and so everybody else. So for those people of a very conservative demeanor who want the security of lifelong employment, I think those days are past. But if we can provide on-the-job training, if we can provide the wherewithal, I think that the opportunities are there. And the facts are that the employment has expanded in those capacities. Now there is one problem that I think there's some validity to, and it's one that has to be watched. And that is the potential development of what in the United States is called the split-level economy. And what do I mean by a split-level economy? Well, it means that here you have all the management and engineers and professionals with the know-how to to get good salaries and so on. The technicians who can handle automated and sophisticated equipment, and many of them unionized who can get high salaries. And then you've got all these people who are working in fast food outlets and that are running courier services and that are running protection agencies and all the rest of it, who are getting nickels and dimes. And that there could be the creation of a higher degree of class dichotomy or class cleavage than we've seen in the past. Marvin Harris, the urban anthropologist in Florida, has written about this in a very anecdotal but a very moving fashion. And I think it's something that could be a problem if we aren't careful. But in Canada, we've had a tradition of you know, sort of equal pay for work of equal value, perhaps to a degree that has not been characteristic of the United States. And if that's the case, then maybe we may not have the split level economy. But there are problems that I think we have to look out for as we look down the next, whatever their year is, towards 2000.
With the companies that are now preparing for the year 2000 that have moved ahead in the information areas, do you believe that it's enough for us just to sit back and let things take their course, or what steps need to be taken?
I believe that we've got a problem of entrepreneurship and vision in this province and to some degree in this country. Many people that in business made their living in stable industries over a long period of time, and they weren't looking out for the future. They didn't have very good, what some people say, peripheral vision to find out what was going on down there. And you need that if you're going to survive. It's adaptation that allows for survival. And I don't think that all our businesses, if you like, have been in that area. I think we have another problem in Canada, that a lot of people in the business sector have thought that they could make lots of money, which they have, in flipping businesses, in stock market promotions and things of this nature. That, in my view, is in fact not creating real wealth. Real wealth is where you create a good, a service, or an experience. And so I guess we're going to have to get an entrepreneurial group in the private as well as the public sector who will apply themselves towards the growth sector. Now they're showing up, and they're showing up in the new generation, fortunately. But I don't think we're going to get a heck of a lot of leadership out of the older generation. I mean, by the older generation, people who are my age and older.
If you had some advice to give in closing and in summary, what would you like people to be aware of as they move towards 2000?
I think that the public of Vancouver has got to realize that no large public or private bureaucracy is going to create their future. The future is going to be created by each of us making our own decisions. But to make our own decisions valid, we've got to have a vision of what the end might be. We've got to have a target. Now, if our target and our vision is basically one of being hewers of wood and drawers of water, I think that we've got a pretty pessimistic view, because the demand for those commodities and products are not going to be growth ones. But if our vision is to see of us using our moxie, using our knowledge, using our intelligence to create new goods, new services, and new products that can substitute for those that we bring in from other places, or ones that we can sell to other places, then I think we're going to have a very positive future. The problem that I've seen as a university professor over 25 years is that many of the students that I've dealt with have seen big government and big business giving them jobs. Many of the people that are employed see big government and big business giving them jobs. I think that the evidence is in now, in Western Europe and in the United States and in Canada, that that is not a certain future. You're going to have to invent your own future. And if you are going to do that, then you're going to have a vision of what's going on. And I'm trying to indicate to you what I believe are some of the ingredients of that future.
Now, unless you have anything else you'd like to say, that just about covers it for me.
You can edit it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I'm planning to do, Frank, in subsequent weeks is to go and visit some of these intelligence-based industries. And
Okay,
I've been out.
Pan.
Okay, you want me to talk to you?
Talk to me.
Okay, that's
Don't
fine.
worry about the camera.
No, okay.
The only thing is that my questions won't be... Can we shut the door, maybe? And do keep it as specific as you can. My questions are a framework,
Yeah,
you know.
sure, no, I understand.
Okay.
Okay, we're rolling now.
Okay, explain to me what you did before about the changing face of Vancouver through the buildings. Go building by building,
Sure.
era by era.
Vancouver has had a very rapid growth in its 100 years. And most people in the city believe that the city is going to naturally grow into the future. And as we travel around Vancouver, we can see some of the things that propelled the city in different periods of time. If you go down to Gastown, you'll recognize that there are a whole lot of warehouses and so on in that area that were really part of a merchant city where manufactured goods came to the east, came off the railway, through those warehouses out onto Water Street, and were delivered around the city. That was the city of the 1900s. In the 1920s was a period of very rapid port expansion as our raw materials of forests and mines and so forth and grain from the Canadian prairies started to go to world markets. And if we look at the growth in our buildings, we see things like the Marine Building, which was built at the end of the 1920s as the home of the Merchants Exchange. And you look in that building, you find that there were shipping lines and grain exchanges and things of that nature. And that was part of the reason the city grew in that period of time. Then, of course, in the 30s, there wasn't very much growth, and we really have to go to the post-war to find the growth. And the post-war growth was our raw material expansion era. And one of the first buildings after the war was the Burrard Building at the corner of Georgia and Burrard Street. That was built by the Utah Mining Company that was into the iron ore business up in the Campbell River area. Or down the street further were the Shell Oil and the Imperial Oil buildings, again reflecting the resources in that field. Or down in Pender Street, the McMillan-Blodell building, indicating our forest. And that was really the growth of that 1950s period. We expanded output enormously. Newsprint, of lumber, of various kinds of minerals and so forth. Our growth in the 1970s, though, moved into a new era, and I see it as really threefold. One, we took a greater share of the management of Canadian economy and government, and we start to find buildings that are developed to house government offices and government corporations, for example. But we also see the rapid expansion of the banks. The Black Tower of whichever bank that is, but every major bank became one of the towers of Vancouver. And it was a measure of us becoming part and parcel of, I think, the management of Canada's public and private enterprise. And that takes us up until about 1980. And when we start to look in 1980, we see a new group of buildings showing up. And these, to me, are very, very interesting because they are the products of our intelligence resources rather than our natural resources. And I look at things like the Swan Wooster building on Georgia Street or the Sandwell building, which is being developed up towards the Granville Street Bridge. And if you look at those and you ask yourselves, what do these people do? Well, they use their intelligence to create services that they can sell to people in British Columbia and abroad. A new class of industry, if you like. So I guess one of the things that we could say is that if we look at Vancouver's landscape, we can say something of the nature of the economic change that has propelled us from a few thousand people in the latter part of the 19th century to a metropolitan area of 1,300,000 people today. The question that I pose to many people is, what is going to be the future? Where are we going to go down the road? Because that is the one that will say something about our destiny.
And what do you see as we move toward the year 2000 as being in our future?
I think we can have several futures, several scenarios, and I think they're ones well worth exploring and well worth thinking about. There's no question in my mind that we are reaching stability in the output of our raw materials. And many people in the forest industry tell me that even with sustained output of what we had before the recession, there will be probably 30% fewer people employed than there were prior to that. And that's part because of automation and the efficiencies that have been brought to the industry. We still have depressed commodity prices for our iron, for our copper, for our molybdenum. Some mines are open, some mines are closed. I don't believe that we can anticipate growing population support on those particular industries. So my view is that we've got to look and see what is happening in the transformation of economic activity and see if that helps us see where we put our eggs, if you like, but our investments in the future. Let me give you an example. In 1911 in this country, something in the order of 75% of all people were employed were in the production and distribution of goods. Now they may have been on the farm, they may have been in the mill, they may have been in the forest, they may have been in the mine, but 3/4 of the gainfully employed were in that area, and only 25% were in management, in the services, and everything else. By the time we got to the end of the war, we find that the goods component of our occupation force had decreased substantially. I'll look at my figures so I get them right, but still 57% of the people were involved in the production and distribution of goods. When we look at the 1981 census in Canada, and again just to look at my figures, we are down to 32%. Now what are all the rest of the gainfully employed doing? That becomes a very great question. They're providing services to business and services to people. They're providing experiences to people. And this reflects changes that we know are taking place if we think about it. In 1946, if you looked at the average household expenditure, you would find that nearly all the income was spent on housing and on food, shelter, food, and things of that nature. So, and what is shelter and what is food? These are goods, really. But if you look at the disposable income of those people who are working in the 1980s, you will find that up to 1/3 of their income is essentially available for discretionary expenditures. And how are those people choosing to spend that? Because that's part of where you have an expansion of your economy. They're buying services. They're buying food, not through the grocery store, but in restaurants, fast food or gourmet, whichever you like. They are choosing to travel. They are saying to themselves, I'm going to invest some of my time and my money on fitness or on health care because my life is worth something. I'm going to run for my life, as some of the slogans are that we see on the television and radio today. These are reflecting the transformation, if you like, of the household expenditures, and it becomes manifest on how people are working and so forth. The second area is in industry. At one time you could just knock a tree down and you'd leave 30% of it in the woods and send off some timber somewhere. You can't afford to do that now. The question is asked, how can I use every inch and every pound of that commodity? That requires research and development. That means that we have to employ people to apply their intelligence to develop better products and better goods. Now, what I'm suggesting to you is that the here and now is that the majority of people are involved in intelligence, service, and experience industries. Now the question is, will they continue to grow, and can they take up the unemployment slack that is being given up by the automation and so forth that's taking place in the industry? If they can, the prospects are good for employment and good for a city which is an intelligence-based and an intelligence-driven city. On the other hand, if those things don't happen, if they happen in other cities and so forth, and we are dependent only on our raw materials, then I don't think that we have got a very optimistic future.
Tell me about the downturns that you have seen, and we've all seen in some other cities. Be quite graphic.
Well, in the eastern United States, there are a group of cities which are now called the Rust Bowl. And those are the cities that were involved in the production of iron and steel and the fabrication of goods that came out of iron and steel. Now we know that in the automobile industries that they've moved away from iron to lighter metals, to composites of plastics and things of this nature, the products of the intelligence industries, if you like, and that has changed very much the nature of the demand. For those cities that were dependent on the production of those goods, they have closed mills, they have unemployment, they have people leaving, you get into a downward spiral because the store loses its trade, if you like, the doctor loses his patients, the accountant loses his customers, and when their economic base is undermined, they either go on to welfare or they leave and move to somewhere else where there are greater opportunities. Now, some people think that that is characteristic of ghost towns of the past, you know, the old mining towns of the American West. I'm telling you that we are talking about, in the eastern United States, cities of 1 million people plus that are hitting those kinds of things. Cities like Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is a very, very large enterprise, and many others of the Akron, Ohios, and the Youngstowns, Ohios, and so forth that you can go through. Every one of them. Perhaps some of you watched the 60 Minutes, it wasn't long ago, which was dealing with a city in Pennsylvania in which the coal company had just decided that it was in the interest of that company to close down their particular mill. It was devastating. It was devastating even to those people that wanted to continue to live in their retirement because they suddenly found their pension plans were undermined. So for cities that remain narrowly focused and specialized on areas that can be vulnerable, I think that you're in problems. But I think that there's other things that we've got to look at for staple regions, and we in British Columbia, we're a staple region producer, producing staple goods, forests and things of this nature. I like people to have a look at countries like Argentina, that in 1947 had a similar population and a similar gross national product to Canada. If you want to look at the growth in Canada, it went that way. If you want to look at Argentina, it went down the other way. And the question is why? Now, Argentina was very dependent on a narrow range of resources, largely of the farm. And when competition came in, they really hit the skids. Another one is New Zealand. New Zealand's in tremendous difficulty at the present time because their traditional markets for raw materials have been undermined. And they haven't been able to replace it with the intelligence-based and other industries. So my view of Vancouver is this, that if our governments and our industries continue to put all our eggs in the natural resource basket, we could have stability, but if the demand for those products decline, we in fact could find ourselves in trouble. On the other hand, if we recognize that our people resources and their intelligence, what they can invent, what they can create, and the services they can give other people, we have an invisible export, which is just as valuable in building an economy as a goods-based resource.
Yeah.
So I think our future will be, if we're smart, in the intelligence-based industries.
Now, before we get on to that, can you describe for me a worst-case scenario, in a sense, for British Columbia if changes aren't made?
Well, the economic models that exist of our economy indicate that about 60% of the growth in the post-war years can be accounted for by the in-migration of people and natural increase. And about 40% has been related to our expansion of our resource base and in part exports to other parts of the country. Now, if that 40% stabilizes or even declines, you're not going to have that to support even the population that you have now. If we become a depressed, perceived off as a depressed area, such as the Atlantic provinces were in the 1960s, you're not going to be a destination for people. And in fact, in 1976 and again in 1983, using children's allowance transfers as the measure, we've had absolute decline in our population. If you have absolute decline in your population, you're not going to buy stuff at the store, you're not going to travel, you're not going to do all these other things, and so you start to find the deaccelerating spiral. So the worst case scenario is that Vancouver can join St. John's and Sudbury and Winnipeg to some degree, which has basically only held its own in the post-war years, and partly, I guess, because of the largesse of Mr. Axworthy and others to see that there are federal transfer payments coming into it. If those aren't there, then I think that the second big trigger of our growth in migration will wither, and with that, our buoyancy and our optimism. And that is a real scenario. It's not one that is exaggerated. If we are not careful, it could happen.
And how do we avoid it then?
Well, I think we avoid it by recognizing that much of our growth is taking place now with the sale of services and experiences to business and to people in our region and the export of those around the world. We've got new high-tech industries that are some of our fastest growing employers. It seems to me they have to be nurtured and they have to be supported. I think that we have a lot of industries or activities which are selling knowledge. I'm looking at consulting firms and others. And that's an invisible sale. I think we've got to cultivate that and we've got to expand that. And we've got to attract people here that have got the wherewithal upstairs, if you like, to have a service that other people in other places can buy. We're very fortunate in the area of tourism. We are a destination of a world class for people that travel. We just have to look at downtown Vancouver in the summertime of people from all over the world. I believe we have to create more destinations for tourists so that they can come and stay, because that's an invisible export. If they go to a national park, or they go to Victoria, to Butchart Gardens, if they go to Whistler or wherever the thing might be, they leave dollars. They take home memories. They don't take home wood, or they don't take home trees, or they don't take home products of the mine. They take home memories, but they're prepared to pay for it. We can cultivate those, and those are important things for us to cultivate. I think that we can also look at the areas of import substitution, because one of the ways that cities grow is that you start to produce things locally rather than having them imported. And we have lots of examples in Vancouver where people are producing upscale goods and services. I mean, by upscales, they're usually a higher price, because it's very hard to compete in the mass markets with things that are produced in Taiwan or in Korea. But for things that are of a quality nature, they can be produced here.
Exactly.
And if we're lucky, we can sell them elsewhere.
Can you give me some examples of things in Vancouver?
Well, I think one of the interesting import substitutions in British Columbia was the wine industry. 10 years ago, nobody bought British Columbia wines. Everything was imported. Now, there's lots of them. I'm not sure what the percentage of the sales are, but there are lots. And they are selling them to other parts of Canada and abroad. That's an import substitution that has become a growth activity in our region. There are people that I've been reading recently of even people have been doing handbags. A company in Vernon that recognizes that sports equipment for hiking, for outdoor activity, is something that is of great importance to British Columbians.
We'll have to